I don't remember exactly when it started. Maybe it was gradual, like a light dimming so slowly you don't realize you're sitting in darkness until you can barely see. Or maybe it was sudden, like a switch being flipped. One moment, I was a husband, a partner, a man she looked at with warmth in her eyes. The next, I was just there, like a piece of furniture that had lost its purpose but still occupied space. Lillian used to see me, really see me. When we met, she laughed at my terrible jokes, touched my arm when she spoke, and leaned into me during movies. Back then, I was important, essential. Then, one day, I wasn't. At first, I told myself it was stress. Work had been crazy for her, and I wasn't exactly in the best shape either. Marriage wasn't supposed to feel like fireworks all the time, right? But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Conversations became shorter. Her phone became more interesting than our dinners. She stopped noticing when I walked into a room, stopped kissing me goodnight, stopped asking me how my day was. I should have said something. I should have asked her, "Are you okay?" Or maybe even, "Are we okay?" But I didn't. Instead, I did what any man who loves his wife would do. I tried harder. I planned date nights. I cleaned the house without being asked. I complimented her, even when she barely looked up from her phone. I did everything I could to remind her of the man she used to love. But nothing changed. Then came the moment that shattered everything. It was late past midnight. I couldn't sleep, and when I reached for Lillian, she wasn't there. That wasn't unusual anymore. Lately, she had been staying up late watching TV in the living room. Or at least that's what she told me. Something in my gut told me to check. As I walked down the hallway, I heard her voice, soft, almost playful. At first, I thought she was watching a movie, but then she laughed. Not the polite chuckle she gave me these days, but a full, warm laugh. The kind of laugh she used to have with me. My chest tightened. I turned the corner and saw her sitting on the couch, curled up with a blanket, her phone in her hand. The glow from the screen lit up her face, and she was smiling. Smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long, long time. And then she whispered, "I just wish you were here instead." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Who was she talking to? Who did she wish was there instead of me? I stood there, frozen, as the reality settled in. I had been trying so hard to prove my worth to her. But the truth was, she had already made up her mind. I wasn't enough for her anymore. I had been invisible for months, and I had a feeling she hadn't even noticed. But she was about to, because that was the night I decided I wasn't going to try anymore. I didn't confront her that night. Maybe I should have, but I couldn't. Instead, I stood there in the darkness, watching as she laughed into her phone, her fingers brushing over the screen with a tenderness I hadn't felt in years. My heart pounded so hard I was sure she'd hear it, but she was too caught up in whoever was on the other end. I turned around and walked back to bed, feeling a numbness settle over me like a thick fog. I laid awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in circles. The logical part of me screamed for answers. Who was she talking to? How long had this been going on? Was it emotional, or had it already crossed the line into something physical? But the deeper part of me, the part that had spent years loving her, didn't want to know. Because knowing would mean facing a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for her attention anymore. I wasn't going to chase after someone who had already checked out of our marriage. If she had truly lost interest in me, then fine. I wanted to see what would happen when I stopped trying. The first thing I did was stop the small things. I didn't text her throughout the day like I used to. No more "how's your day going?" or "miss you" messages. I didn't greet her with a kiss when she got home. Didn't ask her if she wanted to order dinner together. Didn't try to make conversation about her day. I just existed, silent, unmoved. At first, she didn't seem to notice. She came home, phone in hand as usual, barely glancing in my direction as she tossed her bag on the counter. I watched as she poured herself a glass of wine, kicked off her shoes, and settled onto the couch without a single glance in my direction. Fine. I did the same. The next morning, I got up early and left before she even woke up. I didn't make her coffee like I used to, didn't leave her a note. When I got home that evening, I didn't ask her what she wanted to watch. I sat on the other side of the room, scrolling through my own phone, mirroring the distance she had built between us. 2 days passed, then 3. It was like we were two strangers living in the same house. For the first time in years, I realized how little space I occupied in her world. I was a placeholder, something she had gotten used to but didn't actually need. Then, on the 4th day, something changed. I was in the kitchen making myself a late dinner when I heard her voice behind me. "You okay?" I turned, surprised. It had been so long since she had asked that I almost thought I imagined it. "Yeah," I said flatly. I didn't ask her the same. She lingered, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "You've been kind of quiet." I shrugged. "Just busy." She frowned slightly but didn't push it. Instead, she nodded and left the kitchen, her phone lighting up in her hand as she disappeared into the bedroom. I should have felt something. Relief, maybe? Satisfaction that she had finally noticed? But all I felt was empty. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of her giggling at something on her phone. I had spent years trying to make her happy. And now I was learning what it felt like to stop. The silence between us stretched into the following week. It was an odd kind of quiet, not the comfortable stillness that sometimes exists between two people who understand each other, but the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind that fills the air with unspoken words, with questions neither of us wanted to ask, with emotions that had nowhere to go. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't living in my own home. It was like I had become a guest, someone who occupied the space but didn't belong in it. I went through my daily routine like a ghost, waking up early, going to work, coming home late. I didn't ask her how her day was. I didn't try to make her laugh. I didn't wait up for her when she stayed out late. I had spent so long bending over backward to make her happy, trying to prove my worth, that I had never stopped to think about what would happen if I just let go. And it was starting to show. At first, Lillian didn't react much. She still scrolled through her phone during dinner, still laughed at messages I wasn't a part of, still stayed up late watching something on her laptop with her headphones in. But by the end of the second week, I started noticing little shifts. She began glancing at me more. I'd catch her watching me out of the corner of my eye, her gaze lingering just a little too long. She started speaking to me more, but it was hesitant, like she was testing the waters. "Do you want me to grab anything from the store?" she asked one evening as she grabbed her keys. I shook my head. "I'm good." She lingered, like she expected me to say more. I didn't. When she got back, she placed a bottle of my favorite whiskey on the counter. I stared at it for a moment, then at her. "You didn't have to get this." She shrugged. "Just thought you might want it." It was so small, so insignificant, but it was the first time in months, maybe even years, that she had done something for me without me asking. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I felt that old ache in my chest, that deep craving for her attention, for her to look at me the way she used to. But I swallowed it down. That night, I heard her moving around the house more than usual. She paced the hallway, went into the kitchen, then came back out. It was like she was restless, like something was on her mind. I didn't ask her what it was. Then, just as I was about to fall asleep, she spoke. "I feel like, I don't know, like we haven't been ourselves lately." I kept my eyes on the ceiling. "Yeah?" She hesitated. "Yeah. Things just feel different." Different. She had no idea how long things had been different for me. How long I had been fighting to keep us together while she had been pulling away. But now that I had stopped trying, now she wanted to talk? I turned my head to look at her. She was staring at me, waiting, almost as if she expected me to reach for her, to assure her, to fix it. But I didn't. "Maybe that's just how things are now," I said, my voice even. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. For a moment, she looked almost lost. Like she wasn't used to me not chasing after her, not trying to keep her in my orbit. She rolled onto her side, facing away from me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The next morning, Lillian was already up when I walked into the kitchen. She stood by the counter, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, her brows slightly furrowed. It was the first time in years that she seemed unsettled. Usually, she was in her own world, her phone in her hand, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. But today, she looked like someone who had lost something, except she didn't know what. "Morning," she said, her voice softer than usual. I nodded, pouring myself some coffee. I didn't return the greeting. The silence stretched between us as I sat at the table, scrolling through my phone. Normally, I would have asked her about her plans for the day or made some small joke just to see her smirk. But I had stopped trying, and for the first time, she seemed to notice. "You've been really quiet lately," she finally said. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Have I?" She studied me for a moment, her fingers tapping against her mug. "Yeah, you have. Is this something wrong?" I almost laughed. Now she was asking? Now that I had pulled away, now that I wasn't begging for her attention, she suddenly cared? I set my cup down and met her gaze. I don't know, Lillian. You tell me. Her eyes flickered with something guilt? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. She bit her lip and looked away, suddenly very interested in the tiles on the floor. I just feel like things have been off between us, she admitted. I leaned back in my chair. Yeah? What do you think changed? That caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then shut it again like she wasn't sure how to answer. For years, I had been the one trying to keep our marriage together. I had been the one making the effort, filling the gaps, fighting for us. But now, for the first time, I was watching her struggle to make sense of the distance between us. And it was fascinating. She cleared her throat, running a hand through her hair. I know I've been busy and maybe we haven't been as connected lately, but I didn't think it was this bad. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. She still didn't get it. You didn't notice, I said, more to myself than to her. You really didn't notice, did you? She frowned. Notice what? How hard I was trying. I held her gaze, watching as her expression flickered with uncertainty. For months. Maybe even years. I was doing everything I could to hold this together. To get you to look at me the way you used to. And the entire time, you barely even saw me. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't say anything. So I stopped, I continued. And now suddenly you're paying attention. Her jaw tensed. That's not fair, Harlan. I gave a humorless chuckle. Isn't it? She let out a frustrated sigh, setting her mug down with a little too much force. Look, I know I've been distant. I know I could have been better. But I never meant to make you feel like you weren't important. I arched a brow. Then why did you? Silence. Her fingers curled around the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. She looked like she wanted to say something, to argue, to defend herself. But she couldn't. Because we both knew the truth, she had taken me for granted. After a long moment, she exhaled sharply. I have to get to work. And just like that, she grabbed her keys and left. I sat there, staring at the door long after she was gone, the weight of our conversation settling over me. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't bend over backward for her, the one who didn't fill the silence with reassurances and affection. And for the first time, I realized something. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to get used to it. The silence between us stretched into the following days, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just a passive disconnect anymore, there was tension and awareness between us that hadn't been there before. I could feel it in the way Lillian moved around me, how she hesitated before speaking, how she lingered in the doorway like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. She was uncomfortable, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't know how to navigate me. I could see it in the small things. The way she'd glance at me over her phone, expecting me to make the first move. The way she'd sigh when I didn't. The way she suddenly seemed unsure of herself, as if she was realizing that whatever power she had over me was slipping through her fingers. It was a strange thing, watching her wrestle with this new reality. And I won't lie, part of me took a dark kind of satisfaction in it. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book, when she came into the room. I didn't look up, but I could feel her standing there, hovering, debating whether or not to speak. Finally, she did. Do you want to go out for dinner tomorrow? It was the first time in months that she had suggested spending time together. Usually, I was the one planning, the one suggesting, the one making the effort. I kept my face neutral, turning a page. I have plans. The words hung in the air between us, and I saw the flicker of surprise cross her face. She hadn't expected that. Oh. She shifted slightly. What kind of plans? I finally looked at her then, meeting her gaze. Just plans. She blinked, clearly thrown off. For so long, I had been predictable, always available, always accommodating. This version of me, the one who had his own life outside of her, wasn't someone she knew how to handle. She nodded slowly. Okay. Maybe another night then. I shrugged. Maybe. I saw the way she clenched her jaw, the slight frustration in her eyes. She was used to me jumping at any opportunity to spend time with her. She wasn't used to being the one who had to wait. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard her talking on the phone again. But this time, her voice wasn't light and teasing. It was quieter, more clipped. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but I could hear the tension in her tone. And for the first time, I wondered if she was the one feeling invisible now. The next morning, she was up before me, dressed in something she hadn't worn in a long time. A fitted blouse, a skirt that clung just right. Something she used to wear back when she cared about my attention. I glanced at her, raising a brow. Early meeting? She hesitated for half a second before nodding. Yeah, just a busy day. I hummed in response, grabbing my coffee. I didn't push, didn't ask anything else. But I could feel it, the shift, the unraveling of whatever balance she thought we had. She left without another word. And as I watched her go, I couldn't help but wonder, was she trying to get my attention again? Or was she trying to get someone else's? By the time the weekend rolled around, I had fully settled into my new role, the man who no longer tried. The man who wasn't chasing after her, who wasn't filling the silence, who wasn't clinging to a love that had faded right in front of him. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel exhausted. Lillian, on the other hand, was starting to unravel. At first, it was subtle. Question here, a glance there. An attempt to lure me back into the cycle we had lived in for years. But I wasn't playing anymore. And the more she realized that, the more agitated she became. Saturday morning, I was in the garage, tinkering with an old project I had put off for months, when she appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me. "You've been different lately," she said, her tone light but edged with something sharper underneath. I didn't look up. "Have I?" "Yeah, you have. And I don't know, I just feel like, I don't know, like you're distant." I tightened the screw I was working on, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Ha!" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you mad at me?" That almost made me laugh. Mad at her? That would require me still caring in the same way I used to. But I didn't answer right away. Instead, I wiped my hands on a rag and finally met her gaze. "Why would I be mad, Lillian?" She shifted, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know. It just feels like you're pulling away." I set down my tools and leaned back against the workbench. "Lillian, for years, I've given you everything. My time, my effort, my attention. And you barely noticed. Now, suddenly you care." She swallowed, her throat bobbing. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" I countered. Where was this concern a year ago? Where was this attention when I was trying so damn hard to keep us together? Her nostrils flared. "That's not. I didn't," she huffed, shaking her head. "This isn't about me not caring. You're acting weird. And I don't know why." I studied her for a moment, watching the way she fidgeted, how she looked away instead of holding my gaze. "You sure that's what this is about? Or is it that you're not used to me being the one who doesn't care anymore?" Her expression flickered just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for me to see the truth. She wasn't upset because I had pulled away. She was upset because I had stopped orbiting her. She turned on her heel and walked back inside without another word. I let out a slow breath, staring at the open doorway long after she was gone. This was the part she wasn't prepared for. She had spent so long knowing that I'd always be there, always willing to pick up the pieces, always waiting for her to decide when I was worthy of her attention. But now, she was seeing what it looked like when I didn't try, when I stopped waiting, when I let her feel the weight of her own indifference. And by the look in her eyes, she didn't like it. Not one bit. The first crack in her mask. That evening, we were supposed to go to a dinner party. One of her friends was hosting some kind of fancy get-together. The kind where everyone pretends their lives are perfect while secretly judging each other behind their backs. I usually went because she wanted me to, because it was what a good husband did. But I wasn't that man anymore. So when she came downstairs, dressed up in a way I hadn't seen in months, hair perfectly curled, lips painted red, heels that made her legs look like they went on for miles, I didn't react. I didn't give her the compliment she was expecting. Didn't tell her she looked beautiful. I just glanced up from the book I was reading and said, "You going somewhere?" Her face faltered just for a second. "The dinner party," she said, as if I had forgotten. I nodded. "Right? That's tonight." Then I turned back to my book. A full 5 seconds passed before she spoke again. "You're not coming?" I flipped a page. "Nope." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Since when?" "Since I stopped doing things just to make you happy." That landed exactly the way I wanted it to. She stood there, staring at me, completely thrown off balance. For years, she had dictated the terms of our relationship, decided when and where I fit into her life. And now? Now she was realizing she didn't hold the control anymore. She shifted her weight. "People are going to ask where you are." I smirked. "Guess you'll have to figure out what to tell them." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was waiting for me to cave, for me to change my mind, to do what I had always done, fall in line, make her life easier. But I wasn't that man anymore. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out the door, slamming it harder than necessary. I didn't move. Didn't chase after her. I just sat there, flipping to the next page of my book and let her feel it. Let her feel exactly what it was like when I stopped trying. That night, the house was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the eerie, unnatural kind, the kind that signaled a shift in power, the kind that meant something was about to snap. Lillian had left for her dinner party looking put together, confident, her usual self. But I had seen the flicker of doubt in her eyes before she walked out the door. I had seen the hesitation, the frustration, the realization that I wasn't playing along anymore. And for the first time, I think she was afraid. I went about my night as if nothing had changed. I made myself dinner, watched a movie, scrolled through my phone. But there was an underlying tension in my chest, a strange sense of anticipation, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite define. By the time the clock hit midnight, I was starting to wonder if she was even coming home. She had done this before, stayed out late, making excuses about how she had lost track of time or just needed a night out. Back then, I had always swallowed my feelings, buried the discomfort, convinced myself that she deserved space, that I had no right to question her. But now? Now, I just didn't care. I went to bed without waiting up, without texting her, without wondering what she was doing or who she was with. And that was the real shift, wasn't it? The fact that I wasn't losing sleep over her anymore. The fact that, for the first time, she was the one left wondering. The moment she cracked, I woke up to the sound of the front door slamming. Groggy, I blinked at the clock, 2:37 a.m. I heard her heels clicking against the floor, the shuffle of her coat being tossed aside. Then, the unmistakable sound of her pacing. I stayed where I was, lying in the dark, listening. Then, the bedroom door swung open. Seriously. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. You didn't even bother to wait up? I turned my head slowly, barely awake. Didn't know I was supposed to. She let out a bitter laugh. Are you kidding me right now? I pushed myself up on my elbows, rubbing my face. What's the problem, Lillian? Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her breath coming a little too fast. Her makeup was still intact, but there was something off about her, something wild in her eyes, something uncertain in the way she was standing. You don't even ask where I was, she demanded. You don't even care? I stared at her, taking my time before answering. Should I? That hit her harder than I expected. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something, but she hesitated. She looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize, like she had expected a completely different version of me tonight. Wow, she muttered, shaking her head. You've really just given up, haven't you? I let out a slow breath, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. Given up? I repeated, tasting the words. No, Lillian. I just stopped pretending. I stopped playing a game where the rules only applied to me. She let out a frustrated sigh, pacing again. This isn't you. No, I agreed. It's not. Not anymore. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I don't get it. I don't get what you're trying to do. I'm not trying to do anything, I said simply. That's the point. She stared at me, breathing heavily, her face flushed with something between anger and confusion. I could see it now, the slow, creeping realization settling over her. The understanding that I wasn't the man she had always relied on to fix things, to smooth things over, to keep her comfortable in a marriage that only benefited her. She didn't know how to handle it. For years, she had held all the power. And now? Now, she was standing there, staring at a man who wasn't willing to fight for her anymore. And I had a feeling she hated it. She let out another sharp breath, shaking her head. I can't do this right now. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the bedroom door wide open. I listened to her go, listened to the way she moved through the house, faster, more erratic than usual. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and for the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling to hold her together. I laid back down, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the night settle over me. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew one thing for certain. She had never expected me to stop trying. The morning after our argument, something inside me had shifted completely. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even relieved. I just felt done. For years, I had poured everything into this marriage. I had tried, I had fought, I had given pieces of myself away just to keep us afloat. But last night had been the final confirmation of something I had known deep down for a long time. This wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a performance. A cycle. A routine that had lost all meaning. Lillian had spent so much time assuming I'd always be there, that I'd always care, that I'd always come running. But now that I had stopped, she was the one spiraling. She was the one trying to hold on. And that told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't the problem. I got up, showered, made coffee, and packed a bag. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final confrontation. I had no interest in another argument, in another pointless back and forth where she tried to pull me back in just so she wouldn't have to sit with the reality of what she had done. When she finally woke up and saw me standing by the door, suitcase in hand, her eyes widened. "Where are you going?" I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "I don't know yet." She blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" I nodded. "Yeah, I am." Panic flashed across her face. "Harlan, come on. You're overreacting." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in a long time. "No, Lillian. I'm not. I should have done this a long time ago." She opened her mouth to argue, to negotiate, to find a way to keep me in place. But for once, her words didn't matter. Because I was already gone. As I walked out the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, light. I wasn't leaving in anger. I wasn't leaving in pain. I was leaving because I finally understood my own worth. Because I knew that life had more to offer than a relationship that had long since turned into nothing but hollow words and empty gestures. For so long, I had been terrified of what would happen if I stopped trying. Yeah? Now, I couldn't wait to find out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.